Happy Monday. This is our first full week of e-learning days. Hopefully you started with the announcements. If you have not listened to the announcements for today, stop this and go listen to the announcements first. That's where you should always start for the rest of the year with an announcement. So we are ready to look at section 2. And again, it's Monday. So either good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when you're watching this. So section 2 deals with the home front. We ended section 1 with war being declared, and hopefully again the discussion that I just touched my face. I'm trying so hard not to do that. With the problem for Wilson is that now, after spending 4 years of keeping the United States out of war, he has to get the United States ready for war, president and his administration. So there has to be some kind of way to change the policies of the government so that we, one, get an army, two, gear up for war. We need to make things for war. And three, really importantly, get the American public, because the American public is essential, because families, moms, dads are going to be sending their sons, wives are going to be sending their husbands off to war. So there needs to be this effort to support the war. So I've got notes, so please make sure. I'm sorry I can't do this in a better fashion. But first thing they have to do, obviously, is get an army. Our army has never been a large standing army during peacetime up until World War II. So we always have to start almost virtually from nothing. Our army in 1917 has a little bit less than 100,000 men, and that's not anything near what will be essentially needed. By 1918, the United States is going to send 4 million men and some women off to Europe to fight. And that creates a problem for the government. How are we going to do that? And what has to happen is there has to be a draft. And so the United States implements what's called the selective service system. And that is still in place today. All of my gentlemen that are over 17, you guys should have gotten something that requires you to register for the selective service system. And what that is just a pool of names for the draft. And again, the United States will implement a draft. There are a couple ways to get out of the draft. One is called a conscientious objector, and that typically is a religious issue. So there are men that were exempt from that draft. But that's the first thing that has to happen. Then we have to get our economy geared up to fight a war, and that will require some interventions from the government. And the government's going to intervene in 3 ways. One, it's going to look at industry, how industry is producing those goods, and we'll have an industry war board that will take over that and change some of that gearing towards war materials, canteens, boots, socks, uniforms, and then obviously weapons, guns, all of those things, gas mask. Then we also have food, and the Food Administration will be headed by Herbert Hoover, which will be an essential person as we move forward in our course looking at, because he does become a president in the 1920s. And the food does 2 things. One, the Food Administration is geared towards our farmers needing to produce, right? So we're not having any conflict on the continent of North America. So our farmers are free to move and produce, whereas Europe is at issues with being able to produce because they have sent all of their men off to fight war. So American farmers are asked to produce, and they do in great quantities. And the United States quickly becomes, again, the breadbasket of the world. And so that will be also part of that propaganda, and we'll talk about that propaganda machine, is working towards the people in the United States helping the war effort by things like wheatless Wednesdays, meatless Mondays, so that those goods are going actually to troops, not only our troops, but also for farmers to be able to sell. And then our last one, I'm forgetting one, selective service, and then food. Okay, so that takes care of like the economy. But the big essential picture is, how do you get the United States citizens on board with this war? Again, that President Wilson spent 4 years saying this is not our war. It's a war of kings. It's a war of empires. It's not. So one of the things that has to happen is this thing called propaganda. And that will be one of the things that will be directed at the home front. Let me make sure I got everything. So propaganda. And then the second part is making sure that you really start clamping down on some of those fundamental constitutional rights like free speech. And we will institute the Alien and Sedition Acts, and which will really prohibit people from talking about the war, or talking about people in uniform, or talking about being against the war. You can be arrested and sent to prison. Eugene V. Debs is going to protest the war. He's going to say all of those things really that Wilson had been saying for 4 years, and he'll be sent to jail. And he will be sentenced to 10 years, again, for exercising his freedom of speech. And the freedom of speech that he used was, this is a bad war, we shouldn't be part of it. And he will spend 10 years he doesn't spend 10 years, but he's sentenced to 10 years, and eventually will be pardoned in the 1920s. But that Sedition Act is definitely a infringement on our First Amendment rights of free speech. But for Wilson and his administration, it was necessary to do that to ensure that the American population was behind him on this war effort. So let's end this with propaganda, because that's what your assignment is about. Propaganda is used every single day of your life, even if you're not aware of it. Every single commercial is propaganda. Commercials are trying to get you to buy something, use something, do something that you wouldn't ordinarily do. And they do it by a variety of ways. They do it by making things look amazing if you use their product. Like, look at all the people that will love you if you use this perfume or this shampoo or whatever. But the most effective propaganda is fear, and that will be some of the propaganda that will be used in World War I by most countries. Again, one of the issues of World War I is that there really isn't a villain. There's not a bad person. There's not a bad guy. So we have to vilify or do something to make other people look bad. And fear is the biggest propaganda machine that we can have. So your assignment today is to look at propaganda posters that were made by the countries involved in World War I. We're going to look at German propaganda posters. So these are propaganda posters that Germany made about everyone else. We're going to look at British propaganda posters and the United States propaganda posters. And then you'll answer a series of questions about that propaganda and how that propaganda helped the citizens in that country feel about the war or not feel about the war. So when you finish this lecture, and I am surprised how short this is. I'm going to be under 10 minutes. When you finish this, there'll be two things. One is a link to the PowerPoint that actually shows you all the propaganda posters. If I remember correctly, I think I did my translations on all the German posters. If not, hit me up with an email and I'll get that translation out to you. And they are divided up: German, British, and United States. And then underneath is a worksheet that you are answering the questions about those propaganda posters. So this is end of the lecture about the home front. Like, what is the United States now going to do to help support the American war effort during World War I? So please let me know if you have any questions. Again, I'm going to make sure I say this as many times as possible. If you email me a question during the office hours of 9 to 3 and then even 3 to 7, I'm going to get back with you pretty quickly. So please make sure you wait to see my answer and not wait 3 hours and then say something and I'm not going to answer again. So please make sure you do that. So again, I miss you guys, and I look forward to talking with you again on Wednesday. So have a great Monday. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.